morning. Welcome to the Financial Services Innovation Coalition Infrastructure Task Force Summit. We're here today to talk about infrastructure and ways that we can work together to improve opportunities for diverse communities to be involved in large infrastructure projects across the country. We have an outstanding panel here today that'll be introducing us to new vision and new opportunities, talking about how they individually and collectively can work together to maximize minority participation in infrastructure across the country. So I want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. Cece, do you want to start?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Cece Wright. I am a citizen of the Klamath Tribes. I am originally from Oregon. I'm the policy manager at the National Congress of American Indians, and I also work on infrastructure issues for NCAI, which includes housing, telecommunications, broadband, utilities, you name it. And I've been with NCAI for a little over 3 years now. And I'm based in Washington, D.C., as is NCAI. We have the Embassy of Tribal Nations over in Northwest D.C., and NCAI, just for a little background, is the oldest, largest, and most representative body for Indian country. We were founded in 1944. We're celebrating our 80th year. And the Congress consists of federally recognized and state recognized tribes from throughout Indian country, and it's sort of modeled in the same way as Congress. There are tribal delegates who represent their sovereign tribal nations and their interests on behalf sort of as delegates to the National Congress of American Indians. We have 3 meetings a year where the Congress convenes to talk about issues that are going on in Indian country broadly. We focus on issues in Indian country that are national in scope. So, or that generally affect the well-being of Indian country. So that's a little background on myself and NCAI, and I will pass it on.
Ben?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Steinfeld. I work for a fairly new organization called the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. And so what we're looking at is the ways that tax policy has been built to advantage wealth hoarding and to support the super wealthy in retaining their funding. One of the reasons that I wound up here is because we've been looking at the Opportunity Zone legislation and the ways that that did not really spur a lot of investment in communities, but actually was designed to create tax shelters for super wealthy folks to be able to take capital gains, so they already had a bunch of wealth, to be able to have enough capital gains to invest into these projects. And there was a lot of nice language in there about creating reinvestment without spurring displacement, but that's not what happened on the ground. Prior to going to work with EWDI, I worked for the National League of Cities and worked a lot with municipalities around their implementation of both the Infrastructure and Jobs Act as well as Opportunity Zones work, and looking at communities across the country. Most of those opportunity zones, the selection of the spaces was extremely political, and so it wasn't necessarily the most distressed communities or the most distressed areas within communities. The legislation rolled out in really confusing ways, so the only thing that was very clear was that you could do real estate development, and so I think a lot of what happened was high-end real estate development spurred by extreme wealthy people and hedge funds and other investment firms. And it just really hasn't created that kind of community assets and community investment opportunities that Some would argue it aspired to. I would argue it's working exactly as it was designed to work. So I think, with EWDI, when I was interviewing for my job, I said, I've spent so much of my career looking at what's happening at the lower income, what's the floor that people are living with, and I'm not really that worried about extremely wealthy people. If they're just, if they want to sit in a room full of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck and swim around in that, why does that impact me? And what our executive director said to me, she was like, if that's what was happening, that would be fine, but that's not what's happening. People who have this excessive amount of wealth, and I'm talking about like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, so more money than they can ever spend, even with the most lavish lifestyle. They're not just swimming around in a room full of gold coins. They're using that to influence policy. They're using that to influence the public agenda. Even when they're doing good quality work, like, a lot of people point to the Gates Foundation and their work on malaria eradication. That's great work that they're doing, but that's private work, and it's not building a public health infrastructure. So at any time, those individual people could decide, I don't want to work in this country anymore. This isn't the issue that I'm interested in anymore, and just move all of that issue, their investment in that, into another idea or concept. Super wealthy folks are influencing what gets shown in art museums. They're influencing what departments get endowed at universities. They're influencing what new wings are being built in hospitals. And so they're really driving what is part of the public agenda, not to mention the influence that they're able to have on the electoral process, both directly as donors as well as with super PACs and other dark money work. And then finally, what we're looking at, the charitable giving reform and the ways that essentially that's been structured to create tax shelters, again, for wealthy individuals to aggregate and hoard their wealth and then continue to drive their agenda forward. And how much of that money then winds up tied up in an endowment rather than actually going to the issues that it's supposed to be influencing. So the way that charitable law is constructed right now is if you have a foundation, they only have to give away 5% of their revenue off their endowment each year. So that could be a tiny, tiny amount of money, and all the rest of that money stays invested and not actually driving whatever their public purpose is. So yeah, I think we'll speak more about all of those tax policies, but that really sold me on why I should be concerned about the tax implications of wealth aggregation and the super wealthy and the way that they're able to pass that down from generation to generation and keep that money from moving around and really driving additional investment in our communities, driving quality of life for people in our communities. And I'll pass it on.
Thanks, Jen.
Good morning, everybody. And for those also listening online, welcome to this awesome event. When I have a mic, I really feel like we need to start singing, "We're having a party," right? And so here I am, here in Washington, D.C. My name is Lynn Pinkel. I am the CEO of Mackey Company. We are a strategic consulting company, more specifically, industry-specific consulting company. And personally, I have a background in construction and real estate development, as well as highways and byways and bridges. I'm here today to really understand, or maybe perhaps redefine, the meaning of what leveling the playing field is for minorities, women, veterans, and to set aside programs that are being impacted by the recent lawsuits that are transpiring that removes race as a factor in consideration. And really my main statement here is if they are going after race, they could potentially go off after women and veteran and other set-aside programs. That's really the meat and bones of a lot of our certified small businesses throughout the United States. And I'm really looking forward to having conversation and sharing a little bit insights of what's going on in these specific programs and figure out really how we should define or redefine the leveling of playing field in light of the current landscape. So with that said, let me pass it off to Young.
Thank you. Good morning. Wanted to start by saying thank you, Brad, for having me come out here today. I feel very special getting on a plane and coming all the way across the country. I stood him up the first time he asked me to come to an event, so, just apologize for that. What am I? First, I'm a husband, a father of 3 kids. Second, I'm a hunter and a rancher. And then 3, I'm a business owner of many, many businesses. And I'm here today to talk about item number 3 in my life, which are businesses. And in that business, I have a business where I focus on minorities, MBEs and DBEs, and that's where I met Mr. Brad. Some of the organizations, I was the president interim. I'm the vice president now of National Association of Minority Contractors, NAMAC of state of Washington. I've been involved with them for about 10 years, but I'll tell you loosely about them. They're an organization that started back in the 70s in Oakland, and they are the biggest contracting forum of minorities in the United States. So I represent Washington with them. I also serve as a founding board member for Association of Women and Minority Businesses, also known for AMBI, and I help minorities look for government contracting into both services and contracting. And then what makes me really relevant here is in the state of Washington, they have a Capital Project Review Advisory Board, CPARB, and part of that, they have what they call PRC, which is Project Review Committee. And it's a committee that was put together by the governor by law to look after the best interests of minorities as capital projects get born and sprout into funds, into projects. So as it's going through, they have representatives that represent schools, government, all these different agencies to make sure the whole state of Washington covers the right type of representation on these government funds. I represent disadvantaged businesses for the state of Washington. So the governor put me there to make sure as these capital funds go through that they're not forgotten about. So I'm a part of that. So yes, I approve capital projects in the state of Washington. And have I rejected school districts and certain, yeah, I have because of it. So I'm here today to share some of my stories about maybe the cutting edge stuff that happens over towards that side, towards Washington. So thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Young.
Good morning. My name's Donetta Wells. I have my name of my company is Wilson Financial Group, and it's kind of evolved over the years, but primarily it started as a consulting firm. I spent the better part of 20 years being a municipal bond advisor and kind of being under the constructs of access to my community, as I was branded for a very, very long time, and was not able to truly do work that was not able to do work for cities that really needed the work. It was more about urban areas, but there are a lot of cities that are primarily minority that were being overlooked, not thought about just because the commissions and the capitals to meet your portfolio, these cities would not help that. And so I decided that it was time to kind of step out of those constructs and try to do some help with some of these small minority cities, majority Black cities, and have been spending the better part of the last 10 years trying to align myself with people that believe in rural development, that are coming together for the purposes of building Black infrastructure in places where a lot of the statistics are used to create capital here, to solve problems in these areas supposedly, but somehow the challenges still remain. And so also from a perspective of creating sustainable programming and not just sound bites for people. That is definitely key. And then lastly, to kind of help to usher in a new investment class so that if we are not able to make sustainable changes in some of these things, at least we can participate in a way that can benefit us and help to redirect responsible capital into some of these cities that have been overlooked but have quite a bit of land mass, and to understand how to capitalize on the beacon of land masses that are in rural areas for people of color like myself. So that's my mission.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So it's interesting because we all talked a little bit about challenges. And Cece, can you share with us some of the challenges that the National Congress of American Indians are facing with regard to infrastructure being built in their communities?
Yes. I first want to preface by saying a lot of this will probably be very big picture, because there are so many tribes throughout Indian country. They all have their own unique needs. And as somebody who's not on the ground in those communities, I definitely don't want to speak on any tribal nation's behalf. But as somebody who helps tribal leaders sort of know what's going on in the policy sphere when it comes to infrastructure, and tries as much as possible to make sure that they have the resources available to them. I'll speak from that perspective. There's sort of broader issues that impact tribal nations as a whole, and then there's going to be, different circumstantial things that are creating challenges for that specific tribe and that specific infrastructure project that they are working on. So there's multiple layers to it. A few of the sort of overarching issues that really create issues for tribal governments. So tribal governments are, in every sense of the word, full-fledged sovereign nations, right? So they perform pretty much every essential government function, with the exception of currency, military, and one of those things that is a little bit more of a gray area is tax. So they don't have a tax base. They don't tax their citizens. And to the extent that tribes do have economic enterprises that generate revenue for them, whether they're in agriculture or gaming or real estate, whatever investments they're making as a sovereign nation, oftentimes, even with Supreme Court rulings that say that this is not allowed, states, local municipalities will come in and try to tax that revenue. And so oftentimes, tribal nations deal with this issue of dual taxation, right, where they're getting taxed by multiple outside governments on their enterprises. And so that really hinders their ability to make profits, to have their own capital that they can reinvest in their communities. They are also, they don't have sort of, one of the ways that a lot of governments sort of leverage things is through tax-exempt debt and tax-exempt bonds. They don't have access to those things through the IRS, and these are issues that we've been trying to work on for a long time, and when I say we, I mean Indian country generally. They're very complicated issues, but at the heart of it is really taking away that self-determination and that sovereignty from tribal nations, and not allowing them to operate as the full-fledged tribal governments that they are and they're supposed to be in an economic sense. So tax and tax credits and things like that really hinder tribal nations' ability to access capital, to leverage capital, and I was just talking before this panel about land held in trust by the federal government. You're not able to leverage the assets on federal land, right? So a lot of governments, businesses, the way that they sort of access capital is by leveraging assets. When you can't leverage any of those assets that exist on federal land, that process becomes very hard and becomes very much a maze, and you have to, tribal governments are having a harder time navigating the space of accessing capital investments and leveraging the things that they have worked very hard to build in terms of their enterprises and capital. So, right off the bat, there's a ton of challenges just up front with accessing that capital. And then using it is always, a different story. So without a tax base, a lot of tribal nations are required to rely on federal funding, grant funding, formula funding, authorized by Congress, to really operate their nations and their government programs. That often results in, if there's an infrastructure project, whether it's housing or broadband or transportation, those projects become sort of a puzzle, right? You have to piece together all of these different government funding programs, because one oftentimes isn't enough, right? So especially the past few years, if you want to do a housing project, you are using CARES funding, you're using ARPA funding, you're using, the regular formula funding that you get for housing, all sorts of things to sort of make ends meet when it comes to infrastructure projects. And tribal nations often don't have the capacity or the resources to really keep up with all of that, right? And so a lot of their time and energy isn't spent on innovation or doing the things that they really want to do, whether it's, clean energy projects or anything like that. It's spent on, dealing with a maze of grant applications, regulations, waivers. It's a really burdensome process to work on infrastructure projects. I work with the Intertribal Transportation Association. They have, I've talked to transportation directors that have, a $3 million project, but it's taken them 6 years to even get to the point where it's shovel ready. And if something is taking a lot longer because the process is burdensome and there's a lot of sort of red tape that you have to go through, sometimes, depending on what program it's coming from, the funding isn't even available for that long, right? So there's a certain amount of time that you have to obligate the funding, there's a certain amount of time that you have to spend the funds, and tribal nations then, if it's already taking too long, they have to turn around and request a waiver for extension on that time. So there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of, and this goes for any infrastructure project, right? But as sort of under-resourced governments, and I'm sure for anybody who works in local government or state government, you already feel under-resourced, right? Or you already feel sort of stretched thin. So imagine that you're working on these, huge projects, these, really complex puzzles that, you're having to work with BIA, you're having to work with USDA Rural Development, you're having to work with the EPA, you're having to work with HUD, all of these things, and there's two people, maybe one person trying to do all of that. And so I think in a practical sense, these projects feel, sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's when and if there is funding that is accessible. I think another issue that we've been working on, especially the last few years, is making sure that this funding that's coming from the federal government is as flexible as possible. A lot of the time, you go through the trouble of trying to find the projects, you're in the middle of the application and there's this one specific part that makes it not work for your project or your community or something along those lines. And so oftentimes, if there's a lot of, specific criteria that tribal nations have to meet, because they're all so different, they all have their own unique circumstances, the programs have to be as flexible and sort of vague as possible in order to really work for what they want to do. The federal government doesn't like vague. The federal government doesn't like flexible, right? They want to be able to track the money and sort of, they operate in this paternalistic way that really isn't, it's incongruent with sovereignty and self-determination, right? And so you're taking these sovereign nations and sort of forcing them, you know, trying to box them in to fit to this program for, you know, maybe it's $100,000 for this grant. And, you know, it doesn't even scratch the surface of what you need for the entire project, but you're still having to jump through all of these hoops and, you know, submit all of these waivers to make it work for you. And sometimes it feels like a sunken cost, right? It's not worth the time and effort that it takes to get $100,000. It's costing you even more to try and get that money, right? So there's tons of funding out there, especially in the last few years with the Infrastructure Act, ARPA, CARES Act, all of that. If it's not flexible enough, yes, it's available in theory, but in practice, it's not actually available to those tribal nations. And one of the things that we have been trying to fight against for the past few years is we don't want Congress to turn around and say, well, we gave you all this money, but you didn't use it. And that's something that especially, you know, fiscal conservatives have really been touting, is that they want to rescind a lot of this funding because it isn't working for Indian country. Why isn't it working? You know, what are the challenges there? A lot of the time that's resources, that's timing, that's capacity, outreach. There are tons of programs that I talk about on a daily basis that people don't even know they exist. And there is just almost a proliferation of programs in the last few years that, you know, any one or two people working in a tribal transportation or tribal housing department can't possibly keep track of. That's part of why NCAI exists, to help them with that. But we can't be everywhere all at once, right? And we can't do it on their behalf. And so if they don't have the capacity, they don't have the capacity. I think there are other sort of, you know, those are some of the broader overarching issues. There are lots of delays when it comes to projects, especially on federal land, when it comes to, you know, Native American Graves Protection Act, environmental reviews, rights of way, leasing. All of these things make these infrastructure projects stretch out a lot farther than I mentioned some of the deadlines allow. And I think every aspect of infrastructure has their own unique issues that they deal with, right? So transportation is going to have a lot different issues than housing is going to have, energy projects, what have you. One of the things that we talk about in the housing area a lot is the cost. I mean, the cost of construction has gone up so much just in the time that I've been at NCAI. And when you're already sort of stretching these funds as far as they can go, something like Build America, Buy America restrictions, or the cost of construction can really, you know, stop a project entirely. There's also, you know, taking into account that a lot of these tribal nations are located in very remote areas and rural areas that don't have access to, you know, construction companies, banks. There's not a lot of banks around, right? So if you're trying to use new market tax credits or the Community Reinvestment Act, like all of that is subject to where you're at. And it seems like there's a new challenge at every aspect of the infrastructure project. Some of the construction seasons are very short, especially in places like Alaska. There are places where there are no roads to get there, right? So you're having to fly everything in. Depending on where it's at, there's just a plethora of different things that can really get in your way. And I mean, I want to, you know, sort of wrap up so that folks can ask questions or we can move on. But I really just want to drive home the extent to which tribes make it work anyway. And I think that's something that, we focus a lot on the negative, right? But I think as sort of under-resourced minority communities, I want to celebrate the fact that tribal nations sort of resist all of that, and there are a lot of amazing projects that have made it through that process. But that happens when you give them the resources, the sovereignty, the self-determination to make those things work. And that policymakers need to really commit it to memory that tribal nations are a part of the American family of governments, right? That when you're creating a program, that when you're thinking about the eligible parties of that program, states and local governments, tribes should be added to that as well, and that they should be not just added as eligible recipients, but they should be making sure that the programs will work for tribal nations. And a lot of the time, they sort of get added as an afterthought, like, oh, make tribes eligible for that. But they're not really thinking about whether or not the program is actually going to work for tribes, whether it's something that they actually need, or whether or not they can compete with those other entities, right? When you're up against states and when you're up against, these metropolitan cities, you don't have the same amount of resources and the same amount of capacity to really compete for those grant monies. And so things like tribal set-asides, things like, tribal flexibility waivers, those things are really helpful. And then for programs that just, that don't have specific tribal eligibility, don't have specific tribal set-asides, we often get asked, like, why aren't tribes accessing this? And they're not, it doesn't necessarily preclude them from applying for these projects, but you also didn't include them, right, in a meaningful and useful way. And if you're not, specifically an eligible entity for that program, why would you, again, with limited resources and capacity, sort of waste your time going after that money? So if the way the program is structured and the way that the notice of funding opportunity is worded is more important than people really realize. And there's often times where they will, route the money through the state and sort of expect it to trickle down to tribal nations. And you wouldn't, give money to California and sort of expect it to trickle over to Arizona, right? Like, that's just not something that happens. And so lawmakers and the folks who are writing these programs in Congress have to be very intentional about the way that they're including tribal nations in these programs. Even better, just, give them their own programs so that they're, A, not having to compete with each other, they're not having to compete with states and local municipalities, and really honoring that federal trust responsibility and recognizing that it's not just, the federal trust responsibility isn't just making sure that they're eligible for a program, right? It's ensuring that they have these investments from the federal government in return for the land that tribal nations have given up or ceded to them over the years. So that's something enshrined in the Constitution, right? But it's something that is such an afterthought because people assume that it no longer matters or that it's been long enough, right? But we don't treat our other sort of things enshrined in the Constitution that way. So I think commerce with tribal governments is something that really, it needs to be taken more seriously. And we've made a lot of progress in terms of some of the smaller issues, but a lot of those bigger things like the tax issues, those things still really need to be tackled, and we need champions in Congress who are willing to work on those and make it their life's work in Congress to get passed. We have a few people who are really passionate about them, but we still need some more support in a lot of those areas to really make sure that infrastructure itself and economic development is prioritized in these communities in a way that works for these communities. Because it's not always, a lot of these programs and grants focus on sort of the quantitative outcomes of these infrastructure projects and not really the qualitative aspects that they bring for these communities. And something about Indian country is that qualitative aspect is really, it's central to everything that we do. And we need folks outside of our community to really recognize that and uphold it the way that we do.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really important for us to understand the unique environment that the tribes have and the situations that they're building their infrastructure in, and the competitive situations that they deal with. And I know that the communities are so important when you're looking at funding, how the communities are going to be able to get the funding, and how the communities are going to be able to process the funding. As you said, if it takes 3 years to build something, not only do you have challenges with the funding, but you also have challenges with the prices changing. So we recognize there are a lot of challenges for the tribes, and thank you for sharing all that with us. Jen, can you share a little bit about how you talked about how the wealthy aren't really investing in communities? Can you talk about some of the ways that they maybe should be investing in communities?
I'd actually like to sort of challenge that framework, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Because I think there's a point at which holding a certain amount of wealth as an individual or as a family it's just beyond the pale, right? It's unethical. So it's not necessarily, in my mind, that how people should be investing that excessive wealth, but that we need to have a tax system that recaptures that wealth and brings it back into our public coffers. And so whether we're looking at that as inheritance taxes, so that when, stopping that flow of intergenerational wealth between people, that's allowing, again, to recapture into government systems. Whether we're talking about the ways that capital gains are taxed, and that they're preferentially, they're given a preferential tax rate over income. So no matter how much money you make if you're working for a living, if you're getting a paycheck, that's always going to be taxed at a higher rate than someone who isn't working and is getting that from, investments that were made from previous investment and previous dollars that are already held. I want to see more of that coming into our shared flow. And I say this as somebody who is often challenged by the priorities of our government. So I think we also need to be looking at the ways that our tax system allows super wealthy people to influence the economic system. And so I was just looking up the actual name of this. We're actually very supportive of a piece of legislation that was introduced by my senator, Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island, and Representative Judy Chu, called the End Tax Breaks for Dark Money Act. And so this is closing a tax loophole that allows people to put up to $1.6 billion tax-free into dark money campaigns that influence our political system. I kind of feel like you don't ever need $1.6 billion. Like that's extra, right? That's what you have to recognize, is that's not the whole nut that somebody has. That's the money they're able to give away. So, just the idea that you can get a tax break for investing in having influence over our political system that then isn't even tracked directly back to you. So it's not like, oh, Jen Steinfeld bought that ad and, I don't have to stand behind it. I can put it into this super PAC entity, and it doesn't ever have to be traced back to me. And then I don't have to pay tax on that money. That's just bonkers to me. So I think that's one of the things that we're talking about is the influence of excessive wealth on every aspect of our life, right? I think, we're having a lot of conversation about the cost of rent, whether that's commercial or residential rent right now. But I haven't heard as part of that conversation what happened after 2008 and the ways that hedge funds and wealthy individuals came in and scooped up all of these distressed properties, the ways that REITs were designed to be, they were designed to create community wealth, to let us pool our money together and buy something and keep it as a community asset. But now they have become essentially exchange-traded funds that are trying to turn, a 10% or more return year over year. I just got fired up about it because, I have a new job, so I went through the whole onboarding process and where our 401k money can be invested. And they had I don't know if you've seen this, I think they're called quilt charts, but just the different asset classes and what's at the top and what's at the bottom year over year. But for the last 8 years, real estate trusts have been in the top 5 categories, right? So they're turning the greatest return. That means that's not patient community capital anymore. That is, essentially a tool that's being used to drive up the cost of rent in order to provide a return for the investment, or for the investor, for the shareholder. And so I think just the way that we're thinking about money, we need to change our mindset around money. We need to change our mindset. And, I think we can learn a lot from our tribal partners and our folks of Native and Indigenous communities about how we're even thinking about, what we hold for ourselves and what we hold for each other, what we hold for community. What's our safety net? I know I would feel really differently just personally if I felt like when I'm old, there's something that will catch me and I'll be okay. I wouldn't feel like, I have to save all my money and I have to keep it all for myself because I'm kind of on my own. So this individualistic mindset that we often have in America, it's allowed for a lot of innovation. It's allowed for a lot of really great things, but it's also cut us off from each other. And I think that we need to just do some real looking internally at what are the kinds of ways that we want to create shared prosperity versus just I'm trying to get mine and you're on your own and whatever I have I'm keeping here, right? How can we invest in each other? How can we support each other? How can we look at ways that we can invest in a community that allows all of us to thrive? Because I think when we really have a thriving community, it feels a lot more robust and engaged and I don't have a problem. I like to live a comfortable life. I like to wear nice shoes. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying that I want us all to be scraping by, but that's actually, I feel like it's really hard when you are the only person with wealth and you're living basically behind a barbed wire fence and keeping yourself cut off from a horde of people who just don't have enough. And that's not the world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where we all have a little bit of comfort and we can all make sure that, all the children in our community have access to a great education, have access to learning opportunities outside of school and, can go on vacation, that we all can get our teeth fixed when we need to. All of those things that, we just need to be able to take care of and not be stressed about as individual people. If we had more of that connecting all of us, I think there would be less pressure to aggregate, and I think we would all feel a little bit less stressed in our personal situation. We'd be able to take care of each other a little bit more.
Amen. Lynn, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening politically with the Supreme Court and some of the DE&I decisions that have come up?
Okay, do we have an hour, 2 hours? How long do I have?
No, we don't.
Okay, I gotta do a high level. As I was sitting here listening to these two talk about at the high level infrastructure and everything else, I can't help but get granular because I do work with DBEs, MBEs, and WBEs on a day-to-day basis. And by that, because I am an industry-specific consultant, I could relate. And I'll give you a little bit of a background. I did the trades. I've worked in the construction sites. I've worked in highway heavy. I've done development. I've done all of that stuff. So I think there's a level of respect when I like to say somebody has picked up the hammer versus somebody that just project manages, right? And so when I look at it in that scale, and I look at the ecosystem and the landscape of our disadvantaged business enterprise, our MBEs, minority business enterprise, or WBEs, women business enterprise, in the procurement and contracting realm, it's scary about how granular I get, and then the broader picture of what's happening in the ecosystem. So I started making notes as it relates to, you know, on a granular level where the system has, I'm going to get nailed for this, erred, all right? Because it is such a broad understanding of what we feel, or rather, what they feel our inadequacies are, our deficiencies are, and our capacity and our capability. So I want to talk about meeting goals and what that actually means, understanding the capacity and capability of all certified small businesses, the industry-specific training that is lacking in the landscape, and how agencies even put bids together. And I'd love to have this engagement conversation with you all offline. So I want to talk about goals, right? When we talk about goals is something that projects with federal dollars come into play, and that is, you know, the challenge with the lawsuit that's coming down. Our agencies aren't setting goals on certain projects that have federal, and if they're setting goals, they're not meeting them, right? And so when we're talking about statistics, you are at the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, where you could be a woman, a person of color, economically and socially disadvantaged, right? That is what the comprehensive makeup of the DBE program. And that DBE program started in 1984 because the Department of Labor looked at the landscape and said, hey, there's a lot of minorities in the labor field, and the US DOT has the largest budget line item, one of, in the United States. Maybe we can create a program. A year later, 1985, women were added and deemed to be minorities as well, which is very true. I say that because since 1985, the rules have only been rewritten a couple of times, like once or twice, and it is now 2024, and we need to do a look back and see if the rules of 84, 85 is applicable today. Because if it was, the statistics would not reflect that non-minority women are getting 94 to 96% of the billions of dollars of contract opportunities, let's just say even in highway projects, but if you look at the bigger, it's even less than that, leaving us with a measly 4, maybe 6%, depending on what state you're in, right? And if the goals are not met in the state, and not many people know this, funding by FHWA in the highway heavy could be retracted, as what happened in Washington, right? And so we look at that, right? And we try to figure out what that means. So now you guys have heard all the excuses. We don't have capacity, we don't have capability, and we're going to create programs to help you build capacity. We're going to help you do all of these things. And then they're patting themselves on the back. Great job, you moved the needle by 0.01% this year, or by 1%, or by 2%. 1984 was supposed to, am I getting on my soapbox? 1984 was supposed to level set for our minorities. Why are we still at 4% or at 6%? How many years later? 84 to 2024, y'all. That's crazy. 4%. But let's pat ourselves on the back at that success. When we sit here and we think about the effects of what we are fighting for because of this lawsuit, the Ultima lawsuit took race as a factor of consideration in contracting. What most people don't understand is they actually took a particular NICS code out of the game. The 541611 Administrative and Management Consulting Code is no longer part of the game. How many of us who are consultants have that code, right? So if they went after race, now they're going after industry. Again, I'll go to what's next. What are they going to chase after? And that's the hard part, right? Studies have illustrated what we need, disparity studies, the DOJ, the Department of Commerce. They've all shown what our disparities are and interpreted our disparity studies and created programs for us. There's a solution for that, obviously. I'll tap into that later. What they're building is really not up to par. And when I say it's not up to par, we're not part of the writing of the policies. They're interpreting what our needs are because they keep gathering us in rooms, right? The most often common coin is, when are we going to get a seat at the table? And yet when we get a seat at the table, they're harvesting our knowledge instead of paying us to put a program together. That's insane, right? So I object to that. I encourage you to get a seat at the table, but make sure the seat is actually intentional to include you in co-authoring something, not just harvesting what they feel or what they interpret is your need, right? So I'll go back to another point. It's the shallow definition of capacity and capability of minorities, women, veterans, right? We meet with specialists, we interview with them, we tell them about our business, and we give capability statements, right? That's the norm, right? We attend events, we attend meet and greets, we hand over business cards, we try to get a meeting in, right? But did that equate to a contract? Folks, certification is not required in government contracting. It needs to be a strategy for your business. It has to be a strategy for your business because they're going to give you 150% excuses that you are not qualified. Why? You don't know a certified payroll. I'll go to construction. You don't know how to read plans. You don't know how to do bids. You don't have a safety manager. Your risk factors are too high. Your workers' comp you don't have. You don't have bonding insurance. You don't have financials that make sense, and so on and so forth. And this happens both in private and public sector, right? So right off the cuff, if you don't have your stuff together, you've already been disqualified and you didn't know it. But they're selling you on get certified, attend our 30 classes, and everything else. Again, studies show all of our certified small businesses attend business development classes. They work on business plans and marketing, create websites, create social media. Again, as an industry-specific consultant, are you teaching me how to run a construction project? Have you picked up a hammer? Do you know how to do a landscape bid? Sheetrock, painting. We don't have industry-specific training. We use the word wealth building and multi-generational wealth in building when we talk about entrepreneurship, but we're really getting set up to fail. Now, I'm not gonna totally bash all agencies and the nonprofits that help. I'm not even bashing that. I'm simply saying those programs were established back when the need was X. It is 2024. They're rewriting the 4% that we have had for the last 4 years because of these lawsuits, and they're saying our race does not matter. Over 4%, right? Last thing is, and this is probably when I'm teaching job costing and estimating, that the order of construction and estimating is not clearly understood. The government agencies and how they even put these bids together, if they are supposed to consider DBEs and MBEs, they have to consider buying power, right? The government agencies, and I say this in class, so if you guys are out there, you'll know. The government buys light bulbs by hundreds of thousands to light our streets and our infrastructure and everything. They have a membership at Costco, right? They buy light bulbs at, 10 cents on the dollar. Then you go to a Prime, the bigger guys. They have a membership at Target. They can buy light bulbs at about 25 cents on the dollar, right? Now they come down to the second tier, which most of our small businesses are. And we don't have membership at Costco, so we can't buy in volume. We don't have it at Target either. So we got to go to the dollar store maybe, right? Maybe Walmart, where we can get it 2 for $1, 50 cents. So if the government agency is bidding this project at 25 cents, and they're saying we want to include minority participation, women participation, why are you putting this bid on 1, low bid, 2, at 25 cents a light bulb? Shouldn't that pricing be inclusive at 50 cents so that we can play the game. Just the point of consideration when you're looking at all this. And so outside of that challenge is this lawsuit, right? So they've deemed us lack of capability, they've deemed us lack of capacity, they've created programs, and I'm not saying every program is lousy, I'm simply saying some programs have not been effective, and for others who took took the bull by the horns and ran with it, they were given opportunities. But in every single one community, I can count in one or maybe even two hands, I'll give it a benefit, in two hands, how many of black and brown and women have been favored, and they're willing to grow that. We don't build a continuous line for the next up, right? How many? I'll wait. That's the scary part. And if you go to every major city, there's always one person of color, another person of color who happens to be a woman, and then you have your women. They didn't intentionally want to be labeled as the favored, but you know which contracts go to which person of color or which woman. This is the divide that's going to happen for us, has been happening to us, and what's going on at the Supreme Court and the removal of race as a consideration is beyond words. And for anyone out there who feel that the level of playing field is equal, or that if the shoe was on the other foot, folks, as minorities, we didn't have shoes. We didn't have shoes. And the shoes that we have didn't fit. And the shoes that is on that other foot, as other people claim, is not even the right size. So explain to me how we are supposed to be at a level playing field. And I'll throw it back to, again, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 that is supposed to level all United States citizens and African American slaves. Back in 1866. At the time, that regulation made sense because of the state of where the United States is. If in fact that was leveled, why was it necessary to have a Civil Rights Act of 1964? The affirmative action. Because it was never leveled to begin with. The shoes never fit us. It never even made sense because we weren't invited to co-author anything. Period. If things are getting rewritten anyway, now is the time for all minorities and women to join together and push legislation to start including us in co-authoring. Let us help you write the bill. And I'll close with this. This lawsuit is so scary, guys. And we have to do our best to help the agencies not get sued. Because if the agencies get sued over race, all minorities will be screwed. Thank you.
Young, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Washington and how we can look at Washington and maybe help them fix their system?
I will, pardon me, I will give it a shot. Got a bunch of history lesson going all the way back to 1866. I'm not going to get that in depth. But I do sit on both sides. My resume comes from a construction management degree out of school, and I went to go work for big prime contractors. Some companies been around since 1880s. So their practice is very good. So I learned that practice doing capital projects, doing bridges, highways, for like the #1 contractor in the United States. And I did that for about 15 years. So I have $10 billion worth of design, build, alternate delivery experience sitting on the Asian guy in that white boardroom. Love it. Right? So I was able to see how corporations would navigate as soon as new laws or agencies would put new requirements on their RFPs or pursuits. Here's what comes up. So I know the risk and the calculations and the estimate of how such indirect activities are taken off, right? For example, in the RFP, if a client comes in and says, hey, this must be done, ... There's a level of action that requires resources, people, right, place, like everything else. So that gets taken off. So going back to what you said earlier, you have to catch it early. So in Washington, you have certain agencies that are better than others. The major departments like Washington State Department of Transportation, WashDOT, they have a great program where it's not. If it's over $25 million, WashDOT has to go through a process where they have to look at alternative delivery, design build or GCCM or whatever. Typically, they'll choose design build. If it goes that alternative delivery route, they have to look at now inclusion, and if it comes from state funds and federal funds, however the money comes from, it tells you how it's got to be split differently, right? Because like different states and counties and where the money comes from has different requirements, right, and goals. But Washington is more towards the requirement because there's also an executive order from the governor in 2019 saying that there are requirements going forward. They're not goals, they're requirements. So what does that mean? You have RFPs that are changing, the words are changing. You see key personnel from WashDOT. They used to typically ask for the construction manager, project manager, safety manager, design build manager, or quality manager, but they're typically the four major key players that they would ask for, look at their resume. So now the inclusion manager is part of that key personnel, and the safety and the quality guy, it is no longer, like they don't even know about it because now the client has figured out quality and safety should go without saying, right? So now they have this inclusion manager that's included. I'm on multiple projects, but I'm on one on a $380 million design build, small little one. And on that job, it's a requirement, not a goal, requirement. 15% of design has to be MBE, DBE. 21% of construction has to be MBE and DBE. And in that specification, it also says, here's how many times you guys will meet a week. And they define guys. So every 2 weeks, in fact, yesterday, I was at that meeting where I sat with the head guy from WashDOT, head guy from the project from Atkinson, and we have meetings, and we know every single check of every single MBE as of 2 days ago. That's at the level on some of these agencies are at in Washington. They also track down to every single check. However, I'm going to go back to my opening statement about prime contractors. They have caught up. They are now taking that and utilizing that. So now they can actually, even with the state moving and jiving, trying to make programs work, the contractors have gotten smarter. So they've gotten ways to make it more efficient and cheaper. And that's them going back to their old way of being able to utilize their old unit rates, what she was talking about. So they're slowly making their way back, and because it's a private industry that knows risks, that knows money, and they've been doing this since the early 1800s, that they're great at it. So the challenges that we have in Washington are we have many levels of agencies that put steps in place, but you constantly, so I love that. Right? So now you're forcing contractors to put a position in place and put some process in place for MBEs and DBEs and WBEs so they get inclusion and they have a person in place. I love that. But that also needs to be maintained. So the challenge is, we may have some programs, they're getting there, and we may be, 5, 10 years ahead from some places, but the contractor coming in and getting savvy, that's where we're at. And I think, you got the agencies trying to figure out, hey, what can we do to make this sharper and make this tighter? But I like that dance, right? Because I want to talk to some of my friends from different parts of the state. They don't, it's required? Yes, it's required. The bad part of it, in my opinion, the language of contractors being able to lean on that sidekick of best effort, that's still there, right? So as long as they show their best effort of trying to meet the goal, in my opinion, the language is written so the contractors still have an out. That's right. So really, what did we do there? We just made a lot of noise and really didn't do anything, right? So if you just read, if you read what's going on. So contractors are just figuring it out. So that just means to say, so we need more individuals in seats that, that are there that can understand this, see it, so we can communicate it. So I sit on boards now where I get to voice that. A lot of these prime contractors or agencies, when they come in front of boards to ask for millions or billions of dollars to do such and so, they get to the MBE-DBE portion, it's question number 10. And a lot of times you'll see agencies and certain folks just point at a public-funded program, and that is their program. So for example, they'll point at, hey, we're going to call these guys. We're going to post our advertisement at OMWBE. We still get that too up there, and that's good enough. So the challenges, there's a lot of great things happening with certain places in Washington, but it still takes that savvy, business savvy MBE, DBE that must know both sides to still survive. Even with all the programs, I haven't seen any MBE, DBEs grow. And how am I measuring that? Looking at MBE, DBE through OMWBE, which is the metric of certification, and there's only one company that graduated out of that I know of, as long as I've been doing this.
Can I have 2 follow-up questions to continue his dialogue?
Sure.
All right. So you mentioned 21% required. There's all sorts of lawsuits that came out with the term because it sounds like you got a quota for MBEs. So that would be one, right? That 21%. And in light of the recent, and this is the scary connect that people are forgetting, they're drilling down to the language, like he said. Right? The language. I am. It's how it's being executed, and it's how it's being interpreted. When you put in a statute that there's a 21% requirement, it's a goal. You know what, guys? I've been trying to lose weight for the last 20 years. It's a hell of a goal, and aspiring. And I still eat cupcakes and chocolate cakes and such. But what really is missing is the identify, right? You got to walk me through the process to get to 21%. But everybody's stuck on this goal. So in light of the ruling, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the U.S., came down and said, no more minority favoritism. How will Washington State handle that? Because you do have that 21% requirement. Really curious.
The month after we news hit to everyone in Washington, major agencies, the top person, including like the Secretary of State, would come to meetings and says, hey, we know what came out, but we're not changing anything. We're going to carry on.
Let's go Washington. How about that for Washington, huh? That's the key right there. We need to call your Secretary of State to call all the other states and figure out how to battle this out, because that is definitely a win, Young.
Danetta, you want to share with us some of the challenges that you're seeing in rural areas that you're working in?
Well,
Did I ask that right?
yes. Just in listening to everything, I have a unique, I think that's a little bit different. 4 years ago, right in this city, right, probably not too far from here, Congress convened a commission on banking, which is where I come from, even as a CRA officer for some time. And Jamie Dimon of Chase, this is knowledge, so hopefully people won't have a problem with me discussing it openly, admitted that his institution benefited from the institution of slavery and can monetize it and put a number on it. This was 4 years ago. And instead of that being an alarming thing, we have gone the opposite way and decided that we shouldn't be talking about that anymore. Oh, why don't you guys just let that go? And I need for people to understand that Black human beings were considered, were equated the same way on a balance sheet as a piece of equipment. Pieces of equipment have value, are able to be insured, are able to be leveraged, are added to the bottom lines of balance sheets for people and are equated to ways to help you function. So if you are admitting and have put a number value on human value and how that helped you build a huge institution like a Chase Bank, and then proceed to say that what we're going to do is we're going to pledge $100 million in programming instead of putting that money directly into businesses and supporting those businesses, you are shirking the responsibility. I'm not exactly sure how you can monetize and find value to it and then say, hey, you don't need this. This is not happening. You should not have any type of set aside or special treatment when you can directly link the value of a person to things. So if you can admit openly in Congress that you have profited from it and still cannot get people on board enough to say, we should not be rescinding rights at this point, I think there should be some thought processes around, yes, we need to get a seat at the table, but I am of a thought process at this point that I'm gonna build my own table. Because obviously, the value that I bring to the society as a whole is never going to be fully quantified, and you are never going to pay me any type of return on my investment, whether that be intellectual property, whether that, and for instance, everyone spoke about how most of the things that we're talking about is not actually the skill set that are erecting the buildings, or that are building the vehicles or coming up with the technology. What we're talking about is the people that are able to manage the businesses. So how do we continue to put things in place, bonding requirements, insurance things, all these things, by the way, insurance companies included, that at one time insured people as property. So again, at some point, we were given some sort of value. So, but now that value doesn't exist and we don't need these things. So the fact that you can just admit, quantify, put a number on something, and we systematically take away those same rights. I'm not and I think that we should all, like, yes, we all need to work together. Yes, we all need to write our congressmen, talk to our Secretary of States. There needs to be leadership to put, but at some point, you're gonna have to decide, hey, at what point can we divest and systematically work with each other? How can, and it's not just a black thing, I'm specifically talking about slavery because it is quantifiable. There are numbers. This is not an emotional request. There are numbers that say these things, and then we systematically take away our pathways to this generational wealth that people are talking about, even though you can prove how your generational wealth was built off of other individuals. So I am not trying to be or trying to come off as if this is not an important thing, that we don't need to hold our officials accountable. But you also need to hold yourself accountable. And what can we do to invest in each other? And especially in the black community specifically, I'm part of an organization in Atlanta, a place where if you were born into poverty in 1965, you only have a 4% chance of getting out of that poverty if you are an African American. So please understand that 4% comes up a lot. And because you said it a lot of times, but understand that Atlanta is looked at the beacon of black wealth, as a beacon of change for America, how things should be, how cooperative works. But the reality is we don't own the commercial real estate in Atlanta. We're not, there's a few companies, to your point, that will get, and you know these people, oh, we're not gonna, we know that so-and-so's involved, so we know that that's where that's going to. Okay, fine, we can navigate, but what is the purpose of putting these set-asides if it's only gonna make one generation of a family? That's not that's not real. So the idea is where we are trying to partner, where we're spending our monies, we have to be really deliberate in trying to spend it. And it's not going to be as shiny all the time because we don't have the resources to hire a PR firm, but doesn't mean we're the ones actually doing the work. We're the ones actually building. We're actually the ones that are innovating. And then somebody comes behind and puts the money behind from this wealth that they generated unfortunately, off the backs of a lot of the people that they are now trying to take everything away from. So there is a little bit of, okay, yes, we have to cooperate, but at some point we're gonna have to build our own table because, I mean, how long do you need to see that your seat at the table is so that, as I've been told so many times over my career, is just because we need access to your community. Stop telling me that. You need to, there needs to be at some point some investment directly into, I don't need another training program, which is great. Great. You're gonna show me how to, and it's free, so you should be happy, right? I'm gonna show you how to get your DBE done. I'm gonna show you how to get the certification, and it's free to you. We're gonna have meetings, we're gonna eat a little bit, we're gonna pass the cards out, we're gonna do all that, but I still don't have a contract. How is this when you can quantify that I built your company, I built the country? These are not emotional things. We have to not allow for it to keep turning into a conversation about you guys shouldn't feel that way. It's not about what I feel. These are numbers. This is real. There is a real systematic plan to take us back to before when we were property. This is systematic, it's purposeful. All of these programs that we're all talking about, we benefiting as people of color, started with Black people, descendants of slaves, these programs to try to quote unquote level the playing field. So at some point there has to be some directive directly into reinvesting some of the money that was made over the hundreds of years of free labor and the insurance wrapping that was going on back in the 1800s using people as collateral and people as part of your balance sheet. You were able to borrow against that. You were able to go to a bank and get money off to run your business, to scale your business, using people as part of your asset base. There's a systematic way to determine what you owe me, or what you owe us, or what you owe to descendants of slavery. And I'm not talking about reparations. I'm not talking about that in particular. There is a way for you to discover that, and instead of keep saying you're gonna invest these monies back into these programs, oh, by the way, which you decide who you're gonna get to educate us. You're gonna decide that. You're gonna put it into these agencies that you put together, where the people that run them do not look like the people that they're serving. They get those allocations to educate us about things. You have no idea what the struggle is that is inherent because you don't live it. You're not on the ground. You don't understand it. There's no way. So again, you're allocating, yeah, and it's a tax write-off to them also. Let's be clear that this $100 million that they're putting in is also a tax write-off for money that they got off, that started with using people as an asset class. So like, I just want people to be conscious and understand, and it's not a Black thing or descendants of slavery thing, because trust me, when they get done here, they're coming for you too. So let's not be naive. Let's not be, I'm not saying, talk about it. This is not a marching situation. Let's be deliberate, use the numbers to come up with real ways to properly reinvest and disperse patient capital responsibly And of course, yes, support the people, but please allow for that support. If you're going to invest into some support systems, put it into some of the businesses or organizations that are on the ground that are really getting help. And lastly, we have to stop making it so that if I do apply for a grant, I have to get permission from 2 or 3 other people or support letters from other people that generally and systematically have never supported me before, but now they're supposed to support me to go get federal grant money, because if they don't support me, then I'm incapable of being a good fiduciary and dispersing the money to the people that I'm trying to help. So I have to get not only your permission, but your oversight in order for me to receive federal fundings to help the people that I'm trying to help directly. So that's I know it's little soapboxes, but again, even with the emotion, I'm still talking about the numbers of trying to create some real equality and equity in some of this government funding.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. If Dr. Steele were here, he would say racism. Racism, which is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about that with the tribes, the challenges that the tribes face in trying to access capital and build their infrastructure and protect their people and maintain their dignity and their sovereignty. And we're talking about the same situation with wealthy people who want to build those fences around their communities to make sure that people that don't look like them don't get to them. And the same situation with the Supreme Court. It makes absolutely no sense that we're going backwards as opposed to going forwards. And Young, when you leave loopholes in the policy that say that if you make a good faith effort, that's all you got to really do. You don't have to hire them, you don't have to pay them, you don't have to work for you, you just got to make a good faith effort.
They tried.
Yeah.
They sent an email and had a meet and greet.
I was going to say, put an ad in the paper, right?
Exactly.
But I will say this, though. Like some of the bigger agencies now have hired a specialist that looks just at prime contractors, right? So they have someone that reports directly to WashDOT. So this person is completely independent, right? Another add-on would be like me. I'm the inclusion manager for that project, but my contract is with the prime contractor, right? So don't matter what business you have, am I going to talk bad about my client? Yeah. So they're slowly figuring it out, and they're slowly put people in the right places. So yeah, another thing I wanted to add, Brad, so they're constantly doing things.
Thank you. So one of the last things that are supposed to be on our agenda are an issue that I've been working with Lynn on, and Young, you and I have talked about this in the state of Washington, and that's owner-controlled insurance programs. And Cece, particularly today, I want to talk about owner-controlled insurance programs with respect to the tribes. So an owner-controlled insurance program is a program that provides insurance for large infrastructure construction projects. And I'll use a specific example of the Nisqually tribe in Washington state. There's a Nisqually River that runs through the Nisqually tribe's land, and the I-5 goes over that river. So Washington DOT is rebuilding the bridge that goes over the Nisqually River. One of the opportunities that we have is for that bridge construction to be insured by Washington DOT and allow the Nisqually tribe to be a named insured on that insurance policy if they do an owner-controlled insurance program. And the owner-controlled insurance program provides insurance for all the contractors working on that project. So it levels the playing field for small and minority contractors to be able to participate on building that Nisqually Bridge, including the Nisqually's own construction company that builds projects throughout the state of Washington. So the Nisqually tribe could be a named insured on the policy, which would give them more involvement, more control over the construction of the bridge that's going across their river. Otherwise, Typically what happens is Washington DOT would hire a contractor. The Nisqually tribe would have no involvement in that contract. They would have no involvement in the construction. So the owner-controlled insurance program gives the tribe more control over the project, more inclusion in the project, and would actually help them have an opportunity to participate in building the bridge that goes over the river. I didn't want to talk a lot about that because the conversation that we had was excellent, but I just wanted to share that with you. We invited the Native American Contractors Association to be here today, and I was able to spend some time at their conference here this week, and I just want to give a shout out to them for all the hard work that they do supporting Native American contractors. And we need to continue as we work with financial institutions to build coalitions. So we thank you for being here, Cece. We thank all of you for being here. Young for making the trip. Lynn, Jen, and Donetta for coming and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom with us during this panel. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Unless you guys have questions. Questions?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacques Ross, and I am a construction developer. I was zoning in on some of the stuff that you were saying, and I know about the MBE programs that you're talking about. One of the things that a lot of folks do not know when they go into business, especially women-owned businesses, the set-asides are not just for people of color. It's for white women, and they get to participate in that program. See, a lot of folks do not know when they go into business, women, they think the program is going to give them contracts. They think the program is going to give them the opportunity. But if you don't have the past performance or have a company that is going to partner with you, you're not going to get any contracts anyway. And I have registered a lot of MBEs because they didn't know how to do it. I went there, registered them and everything, but I had to tell them because a lot of them got misled that because you're in the program that you're going to automatically look on their portal and see something that qualifies for your codes, your NASDAQ codes, and so you go in and you prepare to get in, and then you come to find out that, okay, you cannot participate in that because you don't have the past performance. So, and with that, I told them if you partner with another person that squares through the system, like the number one, even though they're in a different state, you can partner, joint venture with their company and give them the management part of the funding that's coming to you because they're going to say you do not qualify to receive the money to do the project. So that's my whole take is we need to step back and really think about these programs they put in place and look at the legislations before you even think to go into these programs or what the back room is. And a lot of other guys, I think, they know what the back room is because deals are cut before you even get there for the primes. The primes are already sitting at the table with the officials, so they know that project is coming up before you even get the soliciting. The RFP has already been settled who's getting it if you're not in that back room. So what I'm saying is to offset and to grow, you need to partner and we need to trust one another. It doesn't mean I'm going to come in and take your company. It doesn't mean I'm going to come in and entrench. It just means I'm going to give you the tool that I have to get you to come in. You're going to give me the tool because you're going to provide the services so we can grow. And as we grow, we can add on to different agencies, and we can grow into a conglomerate of a big national company where you compete for building roads, bridges, and get that bonding. And then you automatically have job creation. Just because you're in your backyard doesn't mean that you cannot venture out and do other projects. You got to think big and think globally. We got to stop thinking about the backyard. We in our backyard, barbecuing, cooking out. No. We got to have a big family picnic. So with that said, my name is Jacques Ross, and I think the panel was great. And thank you.
Yes, thank you. Nice to meet you. So this is, I have actually like 20 questions for everybody, but we need a whole nother session on this. Everyone's talking about what's going on, and maybe I'm overwrought, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm concerned that people aren't more worried about what's going on. Like what happened with MBD on yesterday, or the 7 states of Band D and I, and there seems to be no fear, anger, or just outrage, or there's just, like I haven't seen the minority development, minority associations or contractors, no one has written a letter, sent a tweet. You said 3 letters? Well, then maybe you can get the rest, because I mean, it's not on the news. It's not on. I mean, if I didn't follow this, I wouldn't even know what was happening. And so I'd leave it to you guys. Are you more worried than it looks like, or should we be more worried, or is it okay?
Can I comment? Can I comment real quick? So the Minority Business Development Agency, for those who don't know, was shut down 2 days ago. And basically under the guise that it's unconstitutional to designate programs specific to race. And one of the things that they made was MBDA only chose to help certain race groups and not others, right? And I'm not just talking about the Caucasian race, I'm talking about other minority groups in the United States, that reside in the United States, were essentially disqualified. There's, the way the media is it's insane. When the lawsuit for Ultima started back in March of 2020, nobody knew about it. It was brought to light when the decision was done in July of 2023. The agencies knew it was coming. The agencies knew it was coming, but they didn't want to say anything because they were afraid of lawsuits. I understand. But I'll just say this in Minnesota, when I brought it up, it was, we didn't realize you also knew. I convened a little over 40, 50 in-person and online sessions to talk, just to educate our community about the risk of losing certified small businesses. I did not make it about race, because I knew this was bigger than race. So we are a convening of certified small businesses. And that's why I said earlier, minorities, women, veterans, and so on, right? Nobody knows, right? Until we started creating a buzz in Minnesota. And people are surprised that we are not a nonprofit organization. We don't have leaders. We are 5 individuals strong who came together, went to their network, our individual network, and said, we have to educate. The media is deceiving. The University of Florida, you guys saw the headline, shut down DEI, right? And gave all employees the opportunity. If you don't know anything about it, you're just simply saying, oh, they're following what Harvard did. Awesome. But when you don't click that article, you will not see the direct quote of the University of Florida's president, I believe, or a higher up, where they said, yes, we're shutting down DEI. And then there's this little comma at the end of his quote. And it says, and all DEI focus outside contracting. They are ripping our legs from under us, and we are not paying attention because we have the mentality of, that's really not my fight. That's really not about me. I'm trying to put food on the table because I have kids. I'm trying to just survive. And if we continue to have that mentality, it's not just their legs that's going to cut off, guys. We have to pay attention to anything and everything related to DEI. They're wiping us out one by one in opportunities. We're already hurting in health. We're already hurting in technology as communities of color. Guys, do you have, if you haven't understood, broadband mirrors the map of redlining in our community. Do you know how many millions of dollars is in broadband? And we're not taking advantage of it. Most states, majority of the states, do not have IT goals for procurement. They don't have it. Are there Black, brown, women, veteran-owned technology companies out there that are qualified to do this work? 150%. We got to get out of our mindset. We got to get out of our mindset this is not our fight, because if we, and I'm not encouraging anybody to storm the castle either. Take a step back, look at their community leaders, and figure out, how do I stand shoulder to shoulder with you and strategize to improve our chances. That's really what we need to do. And because no one is talking about it, I'm going to empower everybody online and in here to start talking about it. The Ultima versus SBA USDA lawsuit is taking our rights away and our existence away under the guidance of equality, when equality never existed to begin with. Thank you.
So Kevin,
I have one more question.
can I give you an answer real quick?
Go ahead.
So I think we should write a letter.
Yeah.
And I think we should ask the National Association of Minority Contractors to join us, and I think we should try to work with CC and see if we could get a memorandum of understanding or maybe a joint letter with the National Congress of American Indians, and reach out as a coalition, building organization, build a coalition to write our own letter to express our own outrage at this situation.
I'm in.
All right.
Okay.
Next question.
I'm gonna get wonky for a second. Opportunity zones, new market tax credits, and other. I know Dana's gonna. I'm gonna let Jen go first because I know you said it. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna make her answer this question, and then we're gonna CC get you to talk about this too. We've been pushing for years. We've been pushing an idea that opportunity zones, which we think should never have existed anyway. The whole tax was crazy, but it should be done in a way that requires you to have minority involvement or community involvement if you're going to qualify for the tax credit. Let me ask CC first. How many tribes have gotten opportunity zone funding? How many opportunity funds operate in Native American lands?
So I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, because we have somebody else who handles like economic development portfolio, and so I know a little bit about CRA and new market tax credits as it relates to like housing within Indian country. So that's just a preface. But I will say that opportunity zones broadly don't work for tribes. One of the things that NCI and other organizations like NAFOA, Native American Finance Officer Association, has been working on for a long time is CRA modernization, which they published the final rule just late last year, and one of the things that came out of it was instead of doing opportunity zones, they defined native land areas in a way that's more expansive, and they worked with tribes. There's a lot to say about federal consultation processes, and they're not perfect, but this is something, native land areas and the new CRA final rule is something that Center for Indian Country Development and other partners are very excited about, and it kind of goes back to my point earlier about being very intentional about how you define things, right? Because opportunity zones, because it was very vague and it wasn't really, they just sort of expected it to apply to tribal lands without really taking into account like what tribal lands are and how they operate and what are the challenges there. It was, again, those opportunity zones or, the CRA, new market tax credits, were available in theory, but in practice and on the ground, they really weren't. And so with this new native land areas definition, we're really hopeful that that will improve accessibility for these sorts of things. And that they worked on defining that with tribal leaders and with associations who have been advocating about this sort of thing. So I think, yeah, I mean, it really, I think, and I know we're out of time, I'm sitting up here and sort of conversations about minority business development or things that sort of revolve around race are applicable to tribal communities, right? But the thing that sets us apart is that we have a political distinction, right? Which makes things a lot, well, I don't want to say it makes things a lot easier, but it's a different route by which we operate that gives us, or tribal nations, I will say, not us, because members of tribal nations can be, mixed race. They can be, they can have a multitude of identities. It's that, that citizenship and that, political distinction that really sets them apart. One of the benefits of that is tribal consultation, right? There's a trust and treaty responsibility that isn't, I mean, historically ever really upheld, but we have that sort of legal power behind us to say, you need to consult with us about this. This is not, and not to say that like, this is not to separate us from other minority groups in a bad way, or to say, we're not like others, but it is truly a different process and there's a different standard there for consultation and for working together that I think other minority groups are absolutely deserving of, but there isn't sort of that legal precedence there, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch. The same thing is happening when I'm hearing about this Supreme Court ruling. All I can think about is the ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act, Supreme Court case that was decided last year, where they were trying to do the same thing. There were all of these, conservative political think tanks bankrolling this Supreme Court case, trying to take away rights from tribal nations for economic reasons, right? They didn't want tribal nations to have these rights because they benefit from it, and non-tribal entities don't get to. And this is the same sort of thing that's going on with Harvard case and DEI cases. They are attacking that for, they're the wealthiest people in the country are behind these campaigns. And when I think about that, and I'm trying to think, what can you do? What did we do for ICWA? It's hard because the reason we did sort of, miraculously with this Supreme Court win that ICWA case was because of that political distinction, and because of, the difference between, tribal nations aren't, they aren't receiving this as a part of building equity or equality. They're receiving it as part of the trust and treaty responsibility. And so when I think about this new case, because they're not going to stop, right? Even if this one's decided in our favor, the attacks haven't ever stopped. When it comes to these things. So from the perspective of NCAI, it's a little outside of our niche, but it still impacts Native people, on a personal level, and not necessarily, even if it's not necessarily impacting a tribal nation, it's going to impact their citizens in some way. that's another tangent, but I'll let other people answer questions.
Yeah, I want to take a step back on opportunity zones. So first of all, let's remember that that was part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, right? So this was a piece of legislation that was designed to reduce the amount of money the federal government was taking in. Now, I don't love paying taxes, right? I just filed my taxes. It's not a joyful time for me, but I do love living in a place where there is a public education system, where the roads work, where, you know, someone's inspecting my food and making sure that it's safe, all of these things, right? So I think it's always important to think about what do we get out of having federal infrastructure, and remembering that there is right now a very real right-wing attack on the structure of federal government, right? There is a desire to undermine the existence of a federal government. It has a, you know, are there problems with the way that the federal government is? Absolutely. I don't want to live in a place that doesn't have that at all, right? Where we don't have any of those protections and we don't have any of that infrastructure and nothing that's linking our states together, where we go back to each state is kind of a free and separate territory. It's going to be really hard to navigate in this modern world where, you know, we already are dealing with giant supply chains and, you know, all these other ways, right? So if we make that then happen at a domestic level as well, it's just operationally going to be really, really complex. So that's number one. Number two is opportunity zones. You know, you guys were talking about getting minority certification as a business enterprise. That doesn't guarantee you a contract. Same thing with an opportunity zone. It was a designation, but the money coming in, that was a private investment, right? It was just something that was allowable in these environments, but it didn't guarantee you any cash flow, any investments into that. So I think, you know, there were several hundred opportunity zones designated in tribal communities, but that doesn't mean that there's a pipeline then for private investment dollars to come in and for like shovel-ready projects to be developed. And again, these are people who are looking for a tax shelter now and an investment that's going to generate revenue quickly so that when they get their money back out, they're going to have a lot of additional funding over a 7-year period. So you were talking about all the additional red tape with trying to build a project on a tribal land. I think that made that a less attractive investment for a lot of people who, you know, again, this wasn't really about generating new revenue for communities. This was really about generating new revenue for the investors in the opportunity zones, and they were looking at what's there that they can turn around pretty fast. So you have to keep it in 7 years. You can keep it up to 10 years in there. Now that legislation, right, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, most of that sunsets next year. So we all need to be really vigilant about the components of it. You know, if there are components that support your work, become knowledgeable about those and lobby for those to be taken back up by Congress. And if there are things that you think should expire, make sure that you're communicating with your elected officials about those pieces as well. And I'm sure all of us are going to be, you know, pouring through that next year because they're going to sunset next year. And I think, Kevin, you asked about like how do we build in more community value to these. I think absolutely having some kind of board or you know, community benefit agreement requirement for hiring local folks in, you know, even just your workforce, having the workforce be like, there's no requirement that they create jobs. There's no requirement that the construction be awarded to local contractors at all. There's no specific additional call outs for minority contracting. And so what you're seeing is, okay, I'm JP Morgan Chase, I manage, you know, or a hedge fund manager, and I've got clients that want to park some cash somewhere. Who do I know? I probably know some, you know, developer that I have a relationship with already, so we're going to partner up. I'm going to say, we'll bring in the capital for this. What do you have out there already that's shovel ready? They've got a political connection with somebody in a particular community that says, oh, we've got, you know, an old mill building that could be converted into luxury condos. And that's basically what's happened is a lot of places, you know, brownfields and stuff have been converted into luxury condos, but there was some physical infrastructure, so they're not building from scratch. They've got all the expertise you were talking about to navigate, EPA rules, to get your environmental assessments, all of this, to move all of that forward. So you're looking at the places that are like basically the best connected, that have the best relationships already with both capital and the process of navigating all of this red tape, so they could build something, get it on the market, get it out there, and then generate new revenue that people then get back in 7 years or 10 years. So it really didn't create community assets. And in order to even invest in them, like let's say, I don't know, somehow I wound up with some windfall. I had $1 million that I wasn't expecting because my great aunt Susan died and left it to me, and I didn't even know that was coming. Well, I'm not a qualified investor, so I couldn't even put it into, like, as a person that is not meeting these criteria already, you don't have the opportunity to benefit from it. Even if you do have access to capital for some reason, you can't park it in there unless you're a qualified investor, and that's a whole other set of hoops and things that you have to jump through, right? So I think looking at all of those pieces of opportunity zones, like how could we take it? How could we use it? Are there ways to create like, I know a lot of people have critiques of TIF districts, but to create that structure where you're saying some of the revenue that's being generated is going to come back into this community and the surrounding areas. I know there's an opportunity zone that abuts my neighborhood, and one of the things that people were talking about was it's a food desert, right? And so the difference that would happen if there was a Price Right in there versus a Whole Foods in there. Like, who are you signaling is welcome in this community? Who is this for, and who is this, accessible to? Because they were the two grocery store chains that bid it on this, right? And it ended up going to the Price Right, which I think is great. So it's a little bit more accessible to the actual community around this development that's in there. But those are the kinds of things, like who's making the decision on who's going to be the businesses that are going to come in there if it's a mixed-use development, and having real community board, community voice, and genuine community voice. If it's political appointees, if it's a governor or state-level appointees or municipal appointees, what are the criteria that they're using? I'm just remembering that. Do you remember that like binders full of women quote, right? Like, so how are we making sure that we have qualified people that we're going to elected officials and saying, oh, you need to identify 25 commissioners to sit on this thing? Well, great. We've got people from our community that we think would be really great. We've brought them together. We're giving you the resumes so that these folks that don't really have time or want to do additional work don't have to do the legwork to get folks in. So those are all pieces that I think could tinker around the edges with improvement on this if they're going to reauthorize opportunity zones. Okay, great. Yeah, we'll work on it.
Janetta?
Well, inherently, this thing is just going to come back around in another name. I don't want to bust anybody's bubble, and I am so happy that we're talking about it, but this new market tax credit is just a reincarnation from when the affordability period ran out the last time. This is going to come back as something else because inherently some rich guy is going to need a tax shelter, and they're going to want cheap or free money from the federal government. That's just how currency works, the movement of money in this country, it goes that way. The reality is any program where you need a tax credit of that size, most of the people in the area where you're deploying it will never, ever have enough wealth to need a tax credit that way. And the banks that they're gonna be, there's so few banks that can really help them monetize the tax credits. And most of those banks are cronies with the developer that is friends with the guy that needs the tax credit in the beginning. So I just think inherently on the face, there is statistically always about the numbers, never about what you feel. Inherently, the idea that some rich guy that's detached from the area where they're supposed to reinvest in, that is all of a sudden going to be altruistic, and he's in a position where he needs $10 million worth of tax credits. That is never going to get to the people in the community. That is never going to happen. Like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Like, I do not want, like, we can figure out ways that we can and all of this stuff is great. And all of these, we have to have these conversations, and we have to get in rooms and get everybody's opinion, definitely. But these are statistics, this is numbers, this is the flow of money, and the idea, and just the inherent idea that someone that needs this tax credit or can benefit from this tax credit is somehow gonna also be concerned about the people in the area where they're doing the development is so much of a stretch. Please don't hold your breath. Like, please don't do that. Like, please be real about it. Please figure out another way where you can figure out how to match developments by smaller developers and teach developers how to develop from a tax credit standpoint. And it doesn't have to be a new market tax credit. It could be a green credit. It could be the material that you choose to use to build. There's ways to create developments that attract tax mitigation, and that maybe need to be a training so that you can match these smaller developers up with these rich people that need the tax credits. But this idea that these government programs that were set up to be tax shelters and somehow these guys that need these tax credits are not going to come in and invest and give people jobs all of a sudden and do market rate housing, they're going to kick everybody out after the affordability period is over. So, and they make it so hard for you to even be able to afford to live there. So I just think we're being a little naive in our thought processes and ignoring the fact that these same tax benefit programs just come back around with a new name every 7 to 10 years. So I'm just not a fan.
So I don't want you to let everyone be too pessimistic, right? I mean, the fight is real, and we're losing right now, so I'm not going to pretend we're not. But remember, there was a time when there was a 7-day work week, right? There was a time when 12-year-olds, 5-year-olds worked in coal mines, and we, you know, when the society as a whole decides they want to make changes, they can. And I do think we have to keep that in mind, too. I mean, the reason we do this is not because it's easy, if it was easy, already be done, but to know that it, you know, changes have been made slowly but surely, but the people on the other side are just as more committed to keeping their position than we are to fighting them, but it does happen. So
Absolutely. Can I add a little bit to that, especially with what she said with regards to opportunity zones? One of the things with opportunity zones, it's the sell, right? And there are these, you know, these investors are coming into our community to sell that we're going to increase jobs because we're going to build. One of the things that we suggest, and I'll go back to Europe and Asia, I have a background in Europe and Asian business, social economic conversations, is if there is, and I don't know that opportunity zones or new tax credits is going to go away. There's just too much money behind it to continue. And obviously it's designed to get the rich the most benefits in taxes, right? So, you know, if we have an opportunity to make suggestions on how to make it better, it would be the requirement that, one, there is a community benefits agreement. And it's not just wrapped around jobs. It should be wrapped around innovation. It should be wrapped around technology. It should be wrapped around opportunities and entrepreneurship. And if those 5 things were constantly bulleted and defined, right? We have to redefine what community benefits agreements mean. Not because it's just helping jobs and helping our community and the food shortage and all these things, but let's be meaningful and intentional with those bullet points if this is going to happen. If some rich guy is going to come into our community and do this, sure, come on in, we welcome you. But here are your conditions, you know? We want 10 cents on the dollar to come back to our education system, to our vocational schools, to our nonprofits that are serving the homeless, to all of those things that elevate our community. That's what community benefits agreement need to be. It cannot be the shallow community benefits agreement that is so broad brushed that just simply says, we're improving you. Get out of here with that. But again, like Kevin said, there are champions in our midst. You know, sometimes their hands are tied. And I think it's our obligation as a community to work shoulder to shoulder with them and walk the journey with them and continuously say, hey, we want to write this with you. We want to co-author things with you. Because until we have to stop saying, invite me to the table, I think, like she said. We're going to have to create our own table. And our own table, these are our rules. And every time you sit at my table, I am willing to co-author policies, procedures, regulations with you. I'm not giving you the power to do it by yourself. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, thank you, panel.